going to hand it over to my good comrade Tobin to explain.
Thank you, Leo, for that introduction right there. And welcome and good evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Here, glad to have you all here with us. Here, this means a lot, and hopefully we can come away with this a little richer in knowledge than we walked in with here. I think we will too. I'd My name is Tobin Starrett. This was this year was actually my first year as a brigadista during the May Day Brigade, end of April, early May, and I had the honor of seeing up close some of the things we're going to be talking about, and this calling this blockade a calculated genocide is very deliberate, and it's this recognition that gives those of us who have come to be involved in Cuban solidarity work, whatever level it is, our charge. That's to get our government to end this crushing blockade for good and all. And I'll be covering a few of the historical circumstances of the blockade, its impact on the lives of the Cuban people. Also talk a little bit about the history, policy aspects, the costs, some financial, human, and societal. And we ended on a positive of the experience, the resilience of Cuba's people and of the revolutionary experiment. This started with the co-facilitator who unfortunately had to step away from it right there, but I held on to this one thing. She spoke to my heart when she gave us this quote from Nelson Mandela, and I think the quote is important for no other reason than this is key to why to what makes the blockade work in the hearts and minds of people in this country here. And it's just to give a little history. This is This was a response to a question. You can find this on YouTube. There's a conservative diplomat, a political writer, Ken Edelman, who got up and after welcoming Nelson Mandela, proceeded to take him to task because he had the audacity to talk to and embrace Fidel Castro, to talk to Muammar Gaddafi, to talk to Yasser Arafat, and expressed his displeasure on behalf of the American people. And Nelson Mandela's, with this kind of a weary look on his face, but a serious one, said, "One mistake which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. And that we can't and will never do." And want to say a lot of other things, but it's worth somewhere in our educationals is you have the history between Cuba and Africa, and it's well worth checking out. But I'd like to move on and say at this particular segment, like all of them, it's learning, but it's also got potentially proactive element to it right there. And time permitting, we'll discuss a little bit more about that. And I also want to tell you a good deal of information owes to a report written by Cuba's foreign ministry to the UN General Assembly, which they're going to move for a vote at the end of this month, toward the end of this month, on ending the blockade. So I'd like to say as I do this, but he wants to drop the names, place in the chat. Just let me know. Just let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and love to have you all here. So it's a little something. There's something a little bit paradoxical in this U.S. media for something so vast and thoroughgoing in scope, something so damaging to this country, and just something that's been so devastating in its effects. The blockade is practically invisible. And if you come away with nothing else, let people know that when they're watching or reading anything produced on the quality of Cuban life in our media or literature that elides any mention of the blockade, they're being misinformed. And one of the things, bringing it up in those vehicles would destroy the propaganda. It would require anybody to pushing it to try and justify the indefensible. So let's get on to a little bit of the history of the blockade, and there's going to be a it's going to go over some relevant points. There's so much that goes on. You could probably do half a dozen timelines here. But we start out with, let's go to the next slide here. Yeah.
Sorry, give me 1 second. For some reason,
That's fine.
technical.
I'll get us running here. We're going to start out with 1959. Beginning in 1959, Cuban revolutionary forces successfully overthrew Batista's dictatorship. And there was that rosy glow that comes in there where the oppressor thinks, aha, okay, we got a potential to do something here with this nice new government, and everybody's all lovey-dovey with Fidel. Didn't take them long to find out that this was not going to be the kind of relationship that Washington had hoped it would be, and the honeymoon was over very fast. 1960, then Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Lester Mallory issued a memorandum to the Assistant Secretary for Inter-American Affairs, Roy Rubottom, explicitly spelling out the need to attack and weaken Castro's government from within. So there was an acknowledgement of the strength of the revolutionary government and the support of the people behind them. They weren't able to make it work. It's worth noting, too, that in March of that same year, Eisenhower was orchestrating a CIA operation, covert regime change operation. The name of the group of operatives in this was called the 5412 Committee. I don't know the significance of the numbers right there, I'm afraid. But this could rightly be seen as actions that lay the groundwork for what would become the Bay of Pigs invasion a year later during Kennedy's administration. October 1960, Castro announced the nationalization of 26 U.S. companies operating in Cuba, among them Esso Standard Oil, United Fruit Company, and most, if not all, the sugar producing industry, which was their staple crop. 1961, we have that infamous Bay of Pigs invasion. There's a battalion of CIA-trained Cuban expats, basically the ex-Batista loyalists and expropriated capitalists. And it fails to overthrow Castro. In fact, the action moves closer, Cuba closer in relation to the Soviet Union. 1962, we hit the apex of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a negotiated end to the standoff between USSR and US. Castro's mediation is often overlooked or ignored. This does not end the naval blockade. It strengthens the overall blockade on Cuba by the Kennedy administration. So this is when things really start to get hot. And I will necessarily be jumping over a number of years here because not because they're not important, but I know that the 70s and 80s support through the Council of Mutual Economic Assistance, this relationship with the Soviet Union, Cuba was able to carry out its socialist planning and weather the traumas that the measures of the blockade had caused. That came to an end when Gorbachev withdrew his economic and military cooperation, Soviet Union with Cuba, and basically dismantled the CMEA, and this was the initiation of the what was known as the special period of damaging economic and social struggle, and heightened already existing inequalities right there. There's there were Cuba was not without its problems during this, but they were to weather them. Now we're in an especially hot period. 2000s to the present, one of the bright spots, if you want to call it that, silver lining, quasi-normalization with the Obama administration, which involved easing or allowed the tourism industry and remittances to flow once again, and those are usually the two basic measures of income that are especially valuable to Cuba. And it's 2 points that the United States attacks too. I call it quasi-normalization just because if you read into this carefully right here, part of Obama's hope was that they'd start to turn some of Cuba's productive forces into vehicles for speculation. So nothing comes without some heavy strings. This too. So the outgoing act of the Biden administration in 2024 was to remove Cuba from the state-sponsored terrorism list, which is a good thing. Second Trump administration immediately put that back into effect, and wound up with uber hawkish Cuban American Republican Senator Marco Rubio was appointed Secretary of State, and those measures went right back into effect and have been intensified ever since too. Let's get into a little bit of what blockade and embargo, because those terms are used interchangeably, blockade and embargo, what that means and why those distinctions are important. As sanctions and embargoes, there's a deal of overlap between those in terms of what they cover. Economic and penalties imposed on states or institutions against other states, institutions, or individuals that are broad in scope. Embargoes that more focused, banning all commerce and trade with a particular country through a combination of laws and legislation. And embargoes go back over 200 years. Those are not new. The blockade is much more comprehensive in scope and is militarily enforced, and it can punish other countries or third markets from dealing with a targeted country or two. And it's also important to point out why we call this a calculated genocide, because these are illegal. It's improve international law. If this is done in self-defense, there's some basis for arguing the legality of it. This is a war of aggression, and it really is a war. And that's a point that has to be driven home too, because this is an act of violence. Actually, embargoes and sanctions are an act of violence. Anytime you're depriving people of the means for survival and development, it is a commission of an act of violence. It is an act of war. And this is important. Want to get into some of the vehicles. Those be on the next slide here. These policies that have been put in place, and there's going to be a lot of overlap between these. The language in a lot of these acts overlaps, and you hear a lot of the same rhetoric. and they have similar functions, but the Office of Foreign Assets and Control, the state office, is huge, because it has it administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions based on U.S. foreign policy and national security goals, targeted foreign countries, regimes, terrorists, international narcotics traffickers, those engaged in activities. That's the expressed definition of what thumbnail definition of what OFAC does. But basically, it's what it sounds like. They can seize and control assets of countries outside the United States and prevent any from coming into the targeted country. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to cover these in brief. Okay. There's we're going to go back a little bit backwards in time. The Force Act was introduced by Representative Maria Salazar in January 2025. Has not gone anywhere yet. It prohibits the removal of Cuba from the state sponsor of terrorism list, except at the president's discretion under Section 205 of the Libertad Act. And what is the Libertad Act? That's also known as the Helms-Burton Act, 1996, which kind of makes what I'd call soft coup. That's not, won't find that in the legislation. That's my term. It's a central condition for normalization. And all of these policies make any kind of aid guarantees contingent upon the move toward a government that is favorable to U.S. interests, which then both sides know full well is not going to happen. But that's part of the cynicism of these. Let's go to the next slide there. We can, Leo. Torricelli-Graham bill, known as the Cuban Democracy Act, again, re-implemented ban on subsidiaries in other countries from trading with Cuba, aimed at destabilizing the Cuban government. And it's important to note, too, this comes like right in the midst of the so-called special period right here. Any downtime period is going to be the genesis of some new legislation. National Secretary Presidential Memorandum number 5, it's kind of unfinished work of the Trump administration, finds measures to refine mechanisms aimed at regime change and economic privatizations. Basically, they're turning the screws on the measures already in place. Tourism, travel, ending remittances, and this is part of the back and forth, but you'll hear these terms brought up in the document I'm going to reference that Cuba's foreign ministry is given to the UN, and also in some of these other measures too, because the Libertad Act is basically a regime change bill. These are all basically aimed at the same thing. Let's head to the next slide. Here. Consequences for the blockade on Cuban life are infinite. I just wanted to name several here because I think they're emblematic of just to give you some idea of the scope and the depth of the effects of these. Restrictions on remittances to Cuba without the blockade. You'd have $900,000 US dollars been received as family aid for Cuban citizens in 2024. And so, this we're talking about the period basically March 2024, I think, to February 2025. So the last year. So we're talking restricting development across all sectors in Cuba: energy production, technology, medicine, agriculture, education, sports, you name it. all sectors, limiting trading partners and allies, banks and suppliers in other countries, third markets face punitive U.S. actions or otherwise blocked from doing business due to the myriad restrictions placed upon them. And or it should go without saying, this punishes the population. These conditions have a crippling effect on Cuba's domestic production and export market, which brings revenues home, fund Cuba's development and maintenance, and that's for the express purpose of destabilizing the government. And no matter what the rhetoric says, I'm speaking to the choir here, but it ultimately punishes the Cuban people. The populations that are targeted by these are basically seen as collateral damage by those who put them in place. Let's move on to the next slide here because there's a little bit more information on this, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time. This nice design came at the expense of readability here. Basically, remittances. Americans are restricted from sending cash remittances to their families on the island via Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. All these familiar vehicles right there are blocked. Cuban entity Fincemex is prevented from operating. It's the main remittance market to Cuba, since it's been indicated in the U.S. Department's list of restricted entities. Without the blockade, be looking at $900,000 again, like I said, that would have been received by families of Cuban citizens in 2024. Let's move on to the energy department here, total generation capacity here. And here I'm going to draw a little bit from the UN report. So beg your pardon if it seems a little dry, but I think these details are important here, and it's worth quoting. I'm going to urge everybody to take a look at it after tonight's presentation. There's just a load of information, but there was a critical situation that was based around the end of 2023 when a stable supply of different types of fuels lost. In 2024, power generation had faced an acute crisis due to equipment failures, the impact of 2 hurricanes, and a lack of fuel, especially diesel, with deficits ranging from 1,400 to 1,500 megawatts per day, including 3 disconnections from the national electric power grid between October and December 2024. Situation had a strong impact on the Cuban economy and population. The total generation capacity of the Cuban Electric Union is 5,646 megawatts. However, only 2,122 megawatts, or 38% of what they need, are available daily. So between 4,800,000 and 5 million tons of fuel are required to meet the country's normal electricity demand at a cost ranging between $1,600,000 US dollars and $1,800,000 US dollars per year, depending on the fuel price and variability in the market. As a result of that, there have been continued power outages that affect the population, have a cross-cutting impact on all sectors of the economy. Since January 10th of 2024, the Ernesto Che Guevara thermoelectric power plant has been unable to receive spare parts for its pumps after the Italian supplier CR Technology Systems was acquired by Trillium Flow Technologies, which manages purchase from the U.S. The lack of OFAC authorization, there's OFAC again, for legal permits prevented the contract from being completed. This has led to limitations that have extended into the current period under reviews, causing limitations in generation units, increased energy costs, blackouts that have affected the country's electricity service. Let's move on to the next slide here because we're going to go into technology, the technology sector. The damages caused by the blockade to the information and communications technology sector, including telecommunications, have been estimated at a cost of over 78 million US dollars. ETECSA, the technology company, continued to be the most affected company. The use of telecommunications technology suppliers like Ericsson, Alcatel, Huawei require end user declaration, which delays the process of contracting, delivering equipment, and affects the sovereignty of third countries and their relations with Cuba in the field of communications and information technology. As anybody's has been on the island will tell you, trying to get internet there, various parts of the island, is a challenge. The main community. Okay, let's go to the medical here. There's some, because I think this is what hits home. One of the main drives of the Mayday Brigade and a lot of the other brigades right there has been medical drives, aid supplies. So I thought I'd load some of these statistics. Refurbished dialysis machines are readily available in the U.S., but they're not accessible to Cuba, which if they could get them direct from the U.S., they have to go through Europe instead. Could have obtained 54 refurbished machines in the U.S. for the price of 18 new ones that were purchased through those channels, which would have guaranteed another 180 patients care. Let's go to the next slide here. Okay. In June 2024, a supplier of the Cuban company MetaCuba had to apply for a license from OFAC to export cobalt equipment, air compressors, and spare parts used in the treatment of cancer patients for the country. As part of the U.S. government's genocidal policy, 1 year has elapsed since the request was made, and yet no response received from OFAC. There's OFAC again. The U.S. government also persecutes Cuba's international medical cooperation based on arbitrary and unfounded allegations of human trafficking. By resorting to such slanders, they seek to delegitimize this honorable and altruistic work. Harassment by U.S. officials in various countries against Cuban medical brigades, aid workers, as well as ministers and health authorities, those nations has increased significantly. The persecution of international medical cooperation agreements, among others, is part of a coercive strategy aimed at preventing the inflow of indispensable income to meet the growing needs of the population, which resulted in an estimated loss of over $3.25 million US. Let's go to the next slide here. Okay. All right. It's worth also noting that the report cites that the blockade not only affects the Cuban people but also the American people themselves. There's a product called Labiofam SA. It's basically a homeopathic product used as complementary therapy against cancer. There's also a compound called, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Heberprot B, which is proven effective in the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers, which prevents amputations due to diabetes. It's been estimated that more than a million US citizens are diagnosed with this disease every year. About a half of them develop complex ulcers that could be treated with Heberprot B. The blockade did not exist. And it's worth bringing up again. Cuba also developed during the COVID shutdowns, the pandemic, the antiviral interferon alpha 2B to treat COVID-19, which we're not able to benefit from, neither that nor Cuba's medical brigades. So, just some quick numbers just to give an idea of the overall impact, and I suppose we'll hear a little bit more about that later on. But all this has an impact of more than $629 million US per month, over 20 million US dollars per day, 862,568 US dollars per hour, the blockade. At current prices, the cumulative damage resulting from the implementation of this policy for over 6 days amounts to estimated US over 170 million US dollars. Or taking into account the value of the dollar against the price of gold at the international market, the blockade has caused quantifiable damages estimated at over 2 trillion US dollars. Overall impact. Let's let that marinate for a second. And let's go to the next slide here. Because there's anything as big as a blockade requires propaganda to make it work. So U.S. propaganda, the term, sometimes it's subtle. The term embargo is often substituted instead of blockade. Subtly suggests something less pervasive and devastating in scope than the blockade actually is, but it is a blockade right there. And feel free to call out anybody who terms it an embargo right there. It is a blockade. Widespread belief in the U.S. that these measures only target the government and not the entire country should be thoroughly debunked, but that it bears repeating. And 109, this is a last year's statistic, but 191 out of 193 in the UN General Assembly condemned the blockade in 2024. Three guesses at who didn't condemn, at the two who didn't condemn the blockade, the first two guesses don't count. US and Israel, of course. Let's go on to the next slide here, because there's 3 points that I want to point out, and every one of these little psyops or propaganda points comes with an action. In 2017, the so-called Havana Syndrome, which falsely accused Cuba of launching sonic attacks against embassy officials, but nonetheless gave the U.S. an excuse to renege on any efforts at normalization and tighten sanctions on tourism industry and remittances. This ludicrous psyop still gets run in the present time, despite its having been completely debunked. I still talk to people who still think that's a thing, but that's our work cut out for us here. July 2021, this color revolution that was organized by American-based Cuban propaganda organs, one of them being La Villa del Humor, which is a private Facebook group, as well as National Endowment for Democracy, back Cuban American popular U.S. artists and organizations who came in. Part of the propaganda involved misleading information about the situation the Cuban government was grappling with at the time. And also they would give you differing numbers right there, thousands instead of hundreds. I think at one point there was an article that showed a picture of people protesting in favor of U.S. government and against Washington PSYOP, and they were falsely labeled as supporters of the overthrow or enemies of the protesters against anti-government protesters, and not true. Right about that time, the U.S. State Department released its fact sheet on provision of humanitarian assistance in Cuba, again cloaked in cynical language, humanitarian assistance. March 23rd, 2024, President Biden signed an appropriation bill for fiscal year 2024, which allocated $25 million for illegal radio and television broadcast to Cuba. The same amount for programs supposedly supporting democracy. Those funds are not to be used for the promotion of business, economic reforms, entrepreneurship, or any other activity in Cuba not authorized under the Helms-Burton or Torricelli laws. So basically, this legislation tells on itself, but it's still effective. Let's go to that next slide here too, because this is I think there's something worth lifting up. Cuba is resourceful. They have allies, and in the interest of saving time, I just want to lift up a little something here. It's more than struggle. It's love for its people and its country. And here in Michigan, we put together comrades put together 26 days of Cuban resistance, which they put out on Instagram. You can follow Michigan Action for Cuba on Instagram, but we also have a link to the magazine version that was put together. That's well worth taking a look at. You'll see what it's moving and educational what Cuba is able to accomplish under the most dire of conditions, and you can only imagine what they could show the world if they didn't have the blockade in force. And what's our next slide here? Let's take a look. Okay. Counterpunch article. I'm going to see if I can drop those links into the chat. The next speaker is up here. There's a link to the Cuban Foreign Ministry reports, both through that Counterpunch article, and I'm going to drop links into the chat. Also to the Foreign Ministry's report, both in Spanish and in English. Check it out. This is I have that report partly to thank for what I bought you here, but if for any earnest person doing Cuban solidarity work, it's very much worth checking out. It's 55 pages, very thoroughgoing, and just an incredible report here. And what have we got here? I think I'm about at the end of my portion here. We have, as I understand, we have our familiar refrain, Cuba sí, bloqueo no. Couldn't resist. And I think we have a comrade here who is joining us from the Cuban embassy, if I'm not mistaken, to talk about the effects of the blockade. I would like to introduce himself, so that we may welcome him.
Like this?
Would you rather?
Okay.
I'd also like to just thank in parting the DSA for hosting that watch party for us, and for bringing us our guest. And I'll turn it over from here. Thank you, folks.
Maybe I can sit down.
Maybe come this side so you're not there behind you. Like,
Sorry, it's too technical.
yeah, I think right here, if you sit next to the Yasser as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Right
right.
here, right here.
Can y'all hear us okay?
Yeah, it's a little echoey, but I think we should be able to hear as long as everyone pays attention.
All right, can you hear us? Okay, hello guys, how are you? This is Yasser and David from the Cuban embassy. Yasser's first secretary, I'm second secretary. First of all, we are very grateful and appreciative of this watch party that you have organized about Cuba and about this educational Cuba 101 series that you are hosting. I'm very happy to see very familiar faces. The other guys, are the other guys there? I don't see them. So yeah, I have very happy to see very many familiar faces, and happy to see Leonardo, happy to see the co-chairs definitely of the National Network on Cuba. Happy to see Aaron over there. Very nice to meet you, Mr. Tobin and Otis, Cheryl. Definitely many people. And just to clarify, many of our comrades who are participating in the big umbrella that is the National Network on Cuba, many of them are coming back from Mexico, where they had a huge intercontinental celebration conference with the National Institute of Friendship with the Peoples from Cuba, where we had the president of the organization, who is Fernando Gonzalez, the Cuban hero, but we also had the presence of Elian Gonzalez, whom you probably know very well because he was very tightly connected with you would say the closest, the younger generations of people between Cuba and the United States. We lived through the experience of Elian Gonzalez kidnapping and how both the Cuban people and the American people fought really hard to get him back to Cuba, to his father. So it was very touching for us to have Elian participate in this intercontinental conference. So yeah, without further ado, I think the presentation that Tobin did was very broad and very I think specific on issues that touch on the U.S. and Cuba bilateral relations. So I think that for us being helpful, what we could say about the blockade, the coercive measures that are being implemented by Cuba is to give you a small update of the bilateral relations, if you would call that bilateral relations between Cuba and the United States right now. Right now, the state that we are in this moment, and give you our perspective and our perception of what the U.S. war against Cuba is like for the everyday life in our country. So usually, sometimes we talk a lot about the blockade. We talk a lot about numbers and statistics, and sometimes you have to remember that behind those numbers and those statistics, there are families and kids and children and elderly that are suffering day and night from what the blockade is. And the blockade is translated into lengthy, long hours of blackouts in our country, long hours of issues regarding getting food to the table on a daily basis. And for us, it's, we could take like 24 hours talking to you about how the blockade is directly impacting on all of these issues. Unfortunately, the U.S. propaganda machine is very powerful and has a lot of resources that are allocated every year in the U.S. fiscal year budget, federal budget, where you have millions of dollars that are basically executed to promote PSYOP campaigns against our country. So what I can talk to you about are the main accusations that we are being accused this year for doing or not doing, or basically very negative things that we're supposed to not be doing. So right now we're being accused for having mercenaries in the Ukraine-Russia war. That is the new story that is being told on U.S. Mainstream media. And the main purpose, the main objective of these accusations is not to convince the people, it's not to make you believe what the U.S. Propaganda machine is saying. Basically, the main goal is to pressure some state members in the UN that will be in a few days on October 28 and 29 in the General Assembly voting once against the blockade against our country. So basically, they are making up supposed facts that are not based on any evidence, that we, for some reason, are now having more military in Ukraine than even in Cuba, which is totally crazy. But unfortunately, when there are PSYOP campaigns, truth is the first thing that disappears. And so right now we are, we want to raise attention about this issue, because the campaign, the propaganda machine is gonna, raise the stakes to October 29, because the main goal is to pressure mainly European states. The other thing that is being pursued against Cuba is accusation of the medical brigades against our country, the medical cooperation that we have internationally. Cuba is mostly known for the solidarity that, in spite of all the hardships that we have gone through more than 60 years of blockade, we have tried to promote international solidarity with our medical brigades in basically every continent of this planet. Right now, there is also a campaign against the medical doctors. They are accusing our doctors from being the victims to being the victimaries. If they are not being victims of mass exploitation or what they say now, that they are modern day slaves, they are either that or they are agents of the Cuban government to promote instability within governments. So there isn't even, a straight line of accusations in this sense. So that is something that is also being used as an angle to attack us. Right now, we are going through, as I explained before, through many and lots of blackouts in our country. But every time that we suffer from specific challenges, we try to find a different path to persist and to resist and to ultimately be victorious. From the beginning of this year until the end of the year, we will be implementing and executing the construction and the habilitation of solar farms, around different parts of the country. And we have already incremented our capacity more than 200% of solar coverage of renewable energies as a whole, in order to use these sources of energy as a way to move over, past, and in several directions to avoid the blockade. Because when we say that the blockade is preventing our country to acquire something as simple as fuel, this is actually something that is happening. The US government is calling American vessels from other countries that are bringing fuel to our nation, to our island. They're calling them by phone. They're calling the captain and saying, if you bring the fuel to Cuba, you might be sanctioned, you might be fined, you might lose your job, you might not be able to dock in the United States for more than 12 months. So this is real life stuff that's happening. So you cannot blockade the sun, and that is what we're going to do. We are going to find ways to power our electricity, to power our homes, to power our institutions, our factories, and seek for a way out of what we're going through. The main reasons that we are having trouble with the electricity provisions is not only that we do not have sufficient fuel to provide electricity to the whole country, it's also because our industries, our refineries, our power plants have become obsolete during the years and the decades. And every time that we go outside of our country to buy spare parts, an American company has bought the spare parts, or the company that makes the spare parts. Thus, we don't have access to those products because of the Helms-Burton Act provisions. Basically, we could be saying that we are not successful in providing energy for the totality of our people. But what happens in other countries is that basically power energy companies, they only concentrate on their income, on the clients that they have, on the clients that pay for the electricity bills. And sometimes a whole nation does not, or a country or an island in another location might not have the very own government of those places might not even have the power of giving electricity to the whole nation. And we have always try to provide electricity for the totality of the people. That has always been our main goal, and not to a few people, not to an industry, not to the tourist sector. It's to provide electricity to everyone. And that has been one of the main focuses of the campaign against our country, which basically is trying to promote this agenda and this mindset that Cuba is a failed state. We have to remember that it wasn't Trump that actually said that Cuba is a failed state. It was Joe Biden that accused us of being a failed state and even said that socialism was a failed policy. Well, if socialism was a failed policy, then why does the US keep on pursuing a sanctions policy for more than 65 years? Why doesn't the US allow us, to fail on our own? Why keep on pursuing so many coercive measures on a daily basis and escalating even more? So obviously, the first administration of the Trump presidency, they rolled back most of the U.S. Measures during the Obama administration. They imposed more than 243 measures. Then and put Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list. Then you had Joe Biden for 4 years, who basically maintained the same Trump policy with the same measures and ultimately took Cuba off the list, but too little, too late, 3 days before leaving office. And now the Trump administration 2.0 is back on track in pursuing the policy of trying to destroy the Cuban Revolution, trying to destroy the example of the Cuban Revolution around the world. And we consider that maybe it's not Donald Trump that is doing this, maybe it's somebody else. But unfortunately for them, they don't know, and they do not have the experience of outlasting several presidents and keep persisting and keep fighting for a better future for our people, for social justice, for solidarity, for socialism. So I think I've spoken too much, and I apologize. The Cubans have we have a big problem. We talk too much, and we can thank our commander-in-chief for that. So thank you so much for giving us the possibility of talking to you and updating you a little bit about the reality of Cuba. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh, Thank you for your time. And please don't apologize. We love hearing from you guys, and we love, all of the wisdom and encouragement you have to share. Um, so thank you. I'm gonna give the floor, I believe, back to Tobin for some discussion. Um, yeah, this has been wonderful.
Thank you very much. Um, this is
Is there anything?
yeah, for any questions or comments, general discussion. I just kind of went through I saw one question in the chat. Wasn't sure if I could
Right.
we addressed it right there too. Um, whoever
Yeah, no, I think
would
if
like to raise hand right there.
if anybody has any questions, yeah, now would be the time to raise them.
Like Daniel Perez.
Hello, everybody. First, thank you so much for putting this on and for the opportunity to hear from the Cuban embassy. It's a gift. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to clarify my question. Sorry, I'm in the car, so that's why I'm not able to come off camera. But yeah, the question you had mentioned earlier, Tobin, that it was a thoroughly debunked claim that the blockade does not affect, the emerging private industry or or those allowances for private industry, quote, or whatever it is, that some claim it only affects the government. And you were saying, well, that's been thoroughly discredited. And I would just like to know how I can look that up, only because I went to Havana for the first time just about a month ago, and I was speaking to some locals, and one of the young men said that the blockade only affects the government. So I wanted to know resources about that claim.
Thank you. I'll just speak in a general sense right there too, and sometimes maybe even my language may require some clarification. It's I think it's a I see it as a general truism right there. These are ultimately sanctions ultimately uh, imposed by the U.S. to foment government unrest right there. They have a government that they don't like. Sanctions, just by their nature, tend to, as their history shows, tend to punish the uh, the people. The people. I think that there's my point. I think was just like there's a lot of literature and evidence extant out there that show the effect of the widespread effects of the blockade in Cuba. That's not to say that you're not going to find a range of opinions, you know, and somewhat contradict others that have a that take an opposing point of view. My point was just simply that these measures that are aimed at uh, punishing the government, or at least what the language of the policy is, uh, to impact the government, ultimately have a collateral effect. You can't block oil or food or medicine from coming in or going out without affecting the population right there. It's just as a basically logical premise was all I was trying to say. But I think there's a lot of them. Somebody had brought up Helen Yaffe's book "We Are Cuba," and that would be one of the first things I'd point to as far as the effects and Cuba's attempts at addressing those aspects of the punishing effects of the blockade, and that would be the first place I would that would be one of the first things I recommend. We Are Cuba, and so too I'd recommend taking a look at the report right there. Like I said, it find people who will take an opposite view of opposing viewpoints, but no, it does affect more than just the government, even if its ostensible aim is to impact the government, or destabilize the government, and you know,
And to
revolt. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
no, thanks for that. Oh yeah.
to add on to Tobin's point a bit as well, as somebody else in the chat had mentioned, for like there's a 1960 internal memo between the U.S. What was it? By Lester D. Mallory, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State for Inter-American Affairs, that stated that the purpose of the blockade explicitly was to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. And that's a direct quote from the American government. So, I think the blockade is a deadly thing. Just like Tobin said, it affects all kind of sectors of society. And so, and I just wanted to add that to maybe, because it's a really important piece of history to have when we're talking about this, because uh, when you know that from the jump, the US's policy has always been pretty nefarious towards the Cuban government, like towards the Cuban experiment, towards the Cuban island. I think it makes it much more, clearer that the line of you know, only affecting governments is just not really real, right? Because the government isn't just made up of these illusory things, right? They're made of real people who really live in Cuba, who experience it every day. So I just wanted to add that as well, and I hope maybe that could also serve to kind of just clarify as well, David or Daniel. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. Appreciate it.
We've got a couple questions and I think Yasser wants to chime in as well.
No, thank you. And I just want to add a little thing, in my consideration, the answer this question, David and Dennis, sorry, and others, is very simple. The blockade affect in the same way also a sector of the Cuban society, because when you live in Cuba, the blockade do not discriminate if you work for the government or if you work for a school or if you work for the private sector. And for example, a little example, the Cuban healthcare system, is very recognized because our efficiency, because our doctors, because our prevent healthcare basement, but at the same time, the lack of medicine, the lack of equipment, the inability of our government to import medicines, equipment, peacemakers, of course, do not discriminate when you go to the hospital if you work for the private sector. At the end of the day, there is a direct link with the damage to our population, because there are right now people dying in Cuba because of the lack of medicine or because of the lack of peacemaker, for example. That's the short question, the short answer for your question.
We have one more question too.
Yeah, hi, first of all, I think, you guys did this awesome presentation and whatnot, and I think that too, this presentation comes at a very critical time, because as we are witnessing what's also been happening with Venezuela very recently, with, again, the history of sanctions has impacted the country, with the fact that the US imposes all these violent policies, and now with the violent military aggression, towards Venezuela, and again, the loss of lives and parallels between Cuba and Venezuela, both being socialist countries and all of that very substantial revolutionary movements. So I guess my question is that, like, what are some of the parallels and between of how, like, I guess, like, the way that the US has and their strategy of being very aggressive with Cuba with its blockade, and like the parallels can be made between what's happening in Venezuela too, especially since, like, of how US continues to with its violent dominance in West Latin America. My question makes sense. I'm sorry if it doesn't, but yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Come
Just in case.
closer to the mic. I'm sorry. It was hard to understand. the
Yeah, sorry.
echo. So if you could come closer to the mic so we could understand you better.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, just right here.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my bad. So I guess to reiterate my question, what are some of the parallels between, I guess, like the violence of the blockade that the US has been imposing on Cuba could be also drawn to how the US does this towards other countries, especially with its current aggression towards Venezuela at this moment?
Yeah, I can try to answer. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you, highlighting this issue. Right now, we are living in very dangerous times. The Western Hemisphere, as we know it, the Caribbean as we know it, is in danger of a very dangerous escalation, military escalation from the US government. We are very concerned because we have noticed that the US government is using the pretext of fighting narco trafficking in order to attack sovereign states. So fortunately for the Latin America and the Caribbean, a few years ago, Latin America and the Caribbean was declared a zone of peace. And this was done between all partner members of what we call CELAC, which is the Organization of Caribbean and Latin American States. All of our countries have protected this declaration, and unfortunately, the accusations, the escalation, and the language that is being used by the US federal government against what is supposedly narco-terrorism is very dangerous because today it could be some small ships in the Caribbean, but tomorrow it could be targeted places on land. And this is something very serious. This is something very dangerous. Already General Mike Flynn suggested that Venezuela is first and Cuba is next. So right now, people think that saying these things online on social media is just projecting your freedom of speech, but this is actually very dangerous because we're talking about sovereign states that defend their sovereignty, their independence, and their freedom. The parallels of the violence that is experienced is very different. I mean, we are very different countries. Cuba is an 11 million country population, is a small island in the Caribbean. We have been suffering from the blockade for almost 65 years now. And definitely the experiences lived between Cuba and other countries are very different. I can only talk on behalf of my country. What I can say is that coercive measures, unilateral coercive measures, have always been illegal and counter to the international law and international policy. That is why the UN condemns the blockade against Cuba every year. But we know that we have friends from many other countries that are suffering from this. And that is why we also consider that the blockade against Cuba is actually a genocide. There might not be bombs being dropped on our country for now, but there are, economic bombs that have been dropped against our people for decades. And I cannot stress this enough. It is a genocide. And it is something very dangerous, and it is something right now, the language that is being used with the purpose of escalating is very dangerous, and we call the attention to all of our comrades about this. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. You got a few minutes left. Any other questions from the floor? Comments? Yeah. Okay.
If there are no more questions, there is a few more slides. Thank you, Yasser and David, for speaking and being with us today. Thank you for also thank you. Big shout out to the DC comrades. Thank you to the comrades in Ypsilanti as well for your guys' watch parties. Always love seeing those like cameras with a bunch of people in them. And real quick, I'm just going to share my screen one more time because we're going to share a quote from Miguel Diaz-Canel. And then I will read it. Yes, the blockade exists. Yes, it has been tightened. Yes, we are forced with an economic war. Yes, they despise us. Yes, they grossly, obscenely are intoxicating us, filled with hatred on the social media. But we also have, and this is what matters the most, a heroic and dignified people, and we shall always overcome. As long as that heroism that runs in the genes of all Cubans continues to grow bigger and reveals itself before all adversaries, with the essential and sacred components of unity around one single goal: to preserve independence, sovereignty, and social justice. And I think that's just a really good, I mean, Tobin included it because it is an amazing quote, just showing and exemplifying the spirit of the Cubans from their government to their people to their revolutionary project. Um, and all of that being said, I think the only thing really left to do is just thank you guys. Thank you everybody for showing up today. Um, Please come to our next session. It is our last session in our Cuba 101 series, where we'll be talking about Cuba today, its youth, its national identity, and queerness in Cuban society. That'll be October 30th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Um, if you're subscribed to the newsletters, you'll get information on that. If you are registered via the Zoom, you'll be getting an email notification for that once again. And I think I'll just kind of, I think that's stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much, guys. We are getting out a little bit early, but that is okay. Rest well, everybody, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
you.
Bye.